Phil Goff. Sorry. No, sorry. Phil. I got the Phil part right. Phil Twyford. I got the Phil part right. Phil Twyford. My apology.
It's the revenge of the Phils. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a bit worried, actually, because
deliberate mistake.
If you give Phil Goff, one thing I've learned is that if you give Phil Goff half a sniff, he'll grab the opportunity with both hands. Mr. Chairman, speaking to part two of the bill, Mr. Chairman, speaking about part two, I want to make a point that relates to the argument that many of us have been making this morning about this bill and the fact that National is pushing through this bill under the cloak of budget urgency with no apparent justification for why this bill needs to be passed today. I haven't heard anything from any of the ministers in the chair or any of the government members in this debate about why this bill has to be pushed through under urgency. But the pitfalls of that approach are actually contained within the clauses in Part 2, because Clause 18, which basically ensures that these new flexible purchasing agreements are exempt from GST, is a tidy-up. It's a tidy-up of previous legislative mistakes. Clause 23 amends the KiwiSaver Act so that membership in complying super funds counts for the 3-year eligibility period for a first home withdrawal if they transfer to KiwiSaver. This clause is cleaning up the mess left by the Home Start package and by the legislation that enabled KiwiSaver withdrawals. So two clauses in Part 2 are evidence of this government's previous botch-ups in passing laws in this House, but they don't seem to have learned from their mistakes, because they are pushing through this bill under urgency without any chance for scrutiny at Select Committee, without any expert opinion, without the officials being able to take their time and look at the legislation, without the public being able to come along and make submissions. And you have to wonder whether this bill actually, clauses within this bill will end up back in the House in some kind of mopping up operation in the future, wasting taxpayers' money to clean up the mistakes that this government has made. Clause 20 and 21, Mr. Chairman, are really symptomatic of this government's systematic gutting of Housing New Zealand. The latest and perhaps the last indignity before the organisation is sliced and diced and handed out to anybody who'll take it.
Like John Campbell.
Is actually the removal of any kind of policy and research function. This bill basically takes away Housing New Zealand's mandate to do evaluations of its programs. So it's now basically been reduced to a government-owned version of Barfoot and Thompson, instead of being a full-service social housing organisation devoted to meeting the needs of some of the most vulnerable New Zealanders. It is simply a letting agency. Its ability to manage the waiting lists, its ability to handle and to assess eligibility has been hived off to MSD. Its portfolio has been carved up and flogged off to anybody who'll take it under other provisions in this bill, sir. But these two clauses, 20 and 21, basically take away Housing New Zealand's ability to do research and, most importantly, to give advice on social housing to the government of the day. But this government doesn't want advice on social housing. They don't want to hear from people. We know that there is no evidence base for its policy of flogging off state houses and devolving the job of providing social housing and state housing to the most vulnerable New Zealanders. There is no evidence for their assertion that the government cannot do that job properly, and NGOs and charities and Uncle Tom Cobley, who might come along and register as a community housing provider, it could be private landlords, property developers, anyone who meets the perfunctory requirements of being a social housing provider can line up and get these houses at knockdown prices, and there's no evidence base for it.
Mr Chair, I move that the question be now put.
I'm going to hear from Ruth Dyson.